tech community site and the team blog. And GitHub, I guess we also have them there now. Now in Markdown as opposed to PDF, we're learning. So if you have any questions around those changes or fixes or anything else, I feel like that's about it. And feel free to ask questions or ask us for roadmaps, anything like that.
Are we on set to see the chat window? You guys are just gonna watch it?
I'm watching it.
I'm
Okay.
watching
Yeah.
it here as well too. As we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Up there, it's always hard.
Yeah, it is actually.
I did also start the meeting recording.
Excellent. Yeah, that's that thing. All right.
Cool.
All right, guys, have a great time.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks for kicking us off.
Thank
Yes.
you, Mark.
All right. So we can talk about new features and capabilities in the last couple of releases and some other stuff that we're working on, if that's interesting to people. Of course, we also just love to take, feedback or questions. Feel free to, you can unmute, you can ask your questions in person, or you can type them into the chat window and we can pick them up from there. Everything is on the table. And if we can't, answer the question here, we might direct you to file in GitHub, and then we can loop in other engineers or people on the team. But I don't know how many people we have who have been here before, but that's pretty much how we run it. Usually we get a lot of great questions, and we spend a lot of our time helping people figure out their issues and diagnose and debug stuff. So let us know what you need, and feel free to fire away. Quieter than usual. Everyone went shy in the last few sessions.
We did, didn't
Oh, hey guys. So I've always been curious. This is not like a tech question, but I've been curious about the history of your team and like how your team functions, how big your team is, things of that sort. Like how Service Fabric came to be, and just maybe a small history.
Sure. I can give a quick summary. I mean, so Service Fabric as a thing inside Microsoft has been around for, I guess it goes back to about 2008. If you go look, I think it's still up on Channel 9. If you go look for a presentation from PDC 2008 on SQL Data Services, which was the precursor to SQL Azure, you'll see one of our founding team members, Gopal, talking about a lot of the same concepts that you see in Service Fabric today around, the underlying ring structure, replicas, failover, cluster resource management, load balancing. It's all there, and the team started from that technology, which we built for the SQL and Azure products back then, and continued to evolve into the platform that's there today. That's been quite a time, and we've learned a lot, and of course gained more and more functionality and capabilities over that time. The team has also grown, right? So I joined in early 2010, so I guess I'm at about 10 years. Yikes. Yeah, so it was a lot smaller then. Probably only 10 or 15 people. And right now we're at, depending on how you count people, because some people have multiple duties, we're between about probably 60 and 100 people work on SF in some form or another. That's mainly engineering and PM. Of course, we have a lot of great CSS support personnel, embedded Q&A people. We just opened up chat support for Service Fabric. I think we should find that link and send it out to you. So the team is, as we've grown and as our use has grown, both inside the company and for folks like you, the team has grown to track that. In terms of how the team is structured, if you look at some of the presentations that we've given, we talk a lot about the various Service Fabric subsystems. If you go into the GitHub page as well, there's also a bunch of YouTube talks where members of the team who own certain components or certain subsystems talk about their component, talk about what it does, how it fits in with some of the other parts of Service Fabric. But the team is largely structured around those subsystems. So we have a team that focuses on hosting, and hosting is process activation, application management, containers management and launching those, and that sort of layer. And we have another team that deals with the failover manager, the core thing that watches for failures and reacts to things. We have a team that focuses on communication, the transport, and all these different subsystems. So that's kind of how the team is structured. And based on the needs of the product, people might shift between subsystems. So it used to be that, the transport had a huge number of people on it, but that's because we were building it. Now it's mostly done. Nothing's ever done, but it's partially done. And so people work more now on things like hosting, the container runtime stuff, the cluster resource manager load balancer is a big deal. The failover manager continues to receive a lot of investment and work, those sorts of things. So that's Service Fabric in a nutshell. We find ourselves used not just inside Microsoft, but by you folks as well, and we pick up new customers, certainly inside Microsoft pretty frequently, and keeps us pretty busy. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. You answered it very well. And now I actually do have a question. What's your open sourcing roadmap looking like?
So it's already open source, but we fell off the regular updates a little bit there due to some changes we were trying to make in our build system. That's a mistake, and that's something that we're going to pick back up. We were supposed to do a refresh of the source for 7.0, which came out, and we haven't done that yet. So we're following up with our internal processes to catch up there. The goal is to continue to, at a bare minimum, continue to release the source publicly so that as we're working on features, you can see the progress, and that, I use the source publicly to, point out config flags or, maybe search through it, grep through it. If I'm looking for a particular capability to explain to somebody, it's nice to have the source publicly there. We're also working, and Antonantes, who's here, has been helping us get better at putting more of our roadmap and schedule, our release notes, things like that, in the open as well. We're still trying to figure out for the team if we can develop in the open. I personally think that that's a good goal. It's something that we've discussed and we continue to revisit. I think the main thing that we're working on right now with regard to developing the open is continuing to improve the build and tools. Currently, for example, if you go to GitHub, the instructions are mainly for building on Linux. Turns out LLVM and Clang are pretty good. And that we have to continue to reorganize how Service Fabric is built a little bit to decouple it from some old internal systems that we still use inside Microsoft that aren't available publicly, right? If I, put some build tools out there that you can't actually obtain, or use weird builds of, the C++ runtime or things like that, that's not going to be of any use to anybody. So we're continuing to work to make that better and hopefully to get parity with the instructions that are out there for Linux, for Windows as well, so that more people can participate. We realize that it's a blocker to contributions or stuff like that today for a lot of folks. Again, we want to, or there's a desire to get to development fully in the open, but we still have to figure out how to actually do that, particularly because internally to Microsoft, we support a lot of important business critical workloads, and sometimes those workloads need turnarounds or need to release specific security fixes ahead of when they're available for third parties. Stuff like this happens from time to time, and we need to figure out how to blend those release requirements for things like the core of Azure with an open development model. And it's something we haven't figured out how to reconcile yet. We know that there's prior art out there for teams like .NET. So we're going to go and talk to them and figure out how they do some of this stuff. But we're not there yet. And so I think that what you see is kind of a middle ground, right? We know that we should be doing more, and we're making some steps in that direction, but we haven't landed a full plan yet. In the meantime, what we can do and what we are doing is getting better at describing our current work items, the work that we're ongoing, what we have planned as a roadmap, and getting more of that information out there publicly so that you don't have to wait for the release or one of these calls in order to see what we've been working on. And we know that we haven't been as good at that as we could be and want to be. So that's something that it's not strictly open source, but it is open work, and it is something that we're committed to getting better at. Hopefully that also, I know that that might not be as satisfying an answer, but hopefully that's an answer.
Thank you.
No problem. All right.
So I think I just shared the playlist. Like I found it very useful if people are interested in learning on the different components, like deep dive. So there's a YouTube playlist that I shared which talks about all the service fabric components from the subject matter experts, and then more other videos related to service fabric as well. So.
Yeah, I like those videos, and I'm on the team and was around when things got done.
This is like for people like me who've been here only a little more than a year. It was very useful, and then especially if you're like me, want to really like deep dive and learn more about what is happening behind the scenes. These videos are very useful. Actually.
Ben points out that, yeah, we do tend to do big drops, and that's hard to deal with contributions, right? Because we might be working on something internally, and somebody might open a PR and be working in the same area, and then a month goes by, and then the whole code base gets refreshed, and that is hard to deal with, right? And it makes you have to rebase a lot, or not even a lot. It makes you have to rebase, and things have changed dramatically, and we know that that's generally not desirable, and it's something we want to get better at. Maybe someday we'll be better than Android. I think if we could get to Android's level, that would be a good start, but I think we want to do better than that. And that, at a minimum, we do need to get better at the roadmap, the direction, the current work that's going on, so that there aren't these questions about, what work is going on, right? That should be easy to determine. So we do want to address some of this. Another guy has joined. You're not going to be able to sneak in, Deep. Deep's here now.
Deep is here.
Hello, Deep.
What's up? How's the party?
Good.
Just started.
Just started.
Just started. All good.
Yeah, I'm taking notes for you too.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Cole.
I'm Colby.
Hi, Deep.
And everyone on the call, this is Colby. This is who's taking over for Mark. Mark is unfortunately moving on to a new role, but we've been left in good hands. So everyone wave hello.
Mark Robinson.
Mark Robinson.
So both Marks.
Mark Fussell is now focused more on the dapper stuff.
So you may turn up to one of these.
Yeah, I mean,
I would not expect
he's
it.
here. I can see him.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he's like,
Right.
Okay.
And if you want to hear more about Deep, he takes the honor for creating all these deep dive videos. So you can hear more from him on these videos as well.
We'd asked, do we have any notes about what's coming in 7.1? So the first thing to know about 7.1 is that it's catching a lot of the things that we said were coming out in the 7.0 timeframe. So if you go back to the 7.0 release notes, there were some work items described there. Those are what we've been working on, and a lot of those are popping out in this timeframe. Maybe Anthony, you wanna? I know you've got the chart around.
Yeah, so I want to just hold on to the surprises. But yeah, as Matt said, like I think I can pull the blog post for 7.0. Pretty much like most of the items that was called out, which some of them were very close to completion, but because of the holiday schedule, we didn't have enough time to really wrap up the validations. So like the managed identity, we are hoping to get to a GA state in the next major release, which is end of March or early April. And then also working towards getting support for Ubuntu 18.04, and adding improvements on the supportability side to provide more diagnostics proactively, so you can react and avoid downtimes. Then a few improvements on the application lifecycle, and some of the features that we announced as preview, like in the latest 7.0 release, we are trying to call it, change it to a GA state.
Give a couple examples of what we're.
So that is like you're ability to drain the the connections when you're doing upgrades. I think we announced it as the 7.0 CU2 or the latest refresh release. We said it's a preview, and also we're going to call that try to make it to a GA state. Then we are trying our best to also see if we can add support for. It's still, I didn't want to commit to it, but the low priority support for Azure Spot instances, status no type. We've been doing some work on that front, but we're still figuring out if we can announce it as a preview feature in the next major release. Fingers crossed, like pending all the end-to-end validation and everything is ready to go. I think those are like some of the major items. I'm excited for MI Managed Identity Price of Apps. Like it's been previewed since last in a mature preview state, like since last November, and that's something customers have been asking for it to be GA state so they can explore it in production. So that will happen, and then the good taking for those are the major things I want to call out. And then on the placement side or load balancing, we are making some improvements on that front as well. There are a couple of things that's coming out, and that like system services load balancing, and then better placement of containers based on images. Yeah, so on the load balancing POB side, there are some key improvements coming along, and on the supportability side to help you diagnose things much better, and on the application lifecycle management experiences and managed identity and Ubuntu. These are things I just want to highlight, but I'm not listing out everything line by line items. I'm hoping to add more.
Yeah, I think we're going to be cutting off new feature development shortly, and so that'll give us a good sense of what's going to stabilize in time for the actual release. And so probably by next month's community Q&A, we'll have a good sense of
we'll have the
exactly
final list, because I think we are because I want to make sure like we are sticking to our words, like we committed to a list as part of a 7.0 blog post. I think whatever I said right now is already called out. It's coming in the 7.0 wave, and I'm just working with the engineering team to make sure that we keep our promises.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as Matt said, at the end of next community call, I think I'll have a final list, the committed list. Yeah.
Right.
So there was. Sorry, I missed the.
No, just thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah, no problem.
He's got us in a good time.
Yeah. So the question, there's a follow-up question on MSI. Will MSI work for local debug environments? And then there's some questions around network services and stuff like that. So just as a note, today in local environments, you can already do run as, so you could run it as whatever you want. But that's a Windows run as capability. So we're not strictly tied to network service, but I don't know that that actually helps enough.
Unfortunately,
it's different from. Sorry?
Unfortunately, that doesn't work for .NET Core environments. So I've explored a bunch of this with, I guess, on a support ticket that unfortunately run as only works with .NET Framework apparently. That's
surprising since that's a Windows capability.
I can find I'll send you the
I would appreciate that. That would be news to me. Wouldn't be the first time I was surprised by something, but it's news. So the goal is to get to, I think there's a Key Vault reference flag or something like this, where you can use that locally. You can't use actual managed identity because the managed identity is an Azure capability. So what you end up with, and I think that there's a demo of this from .NET showing it working. Or what were you
I think we have. I want to make sure I understood the question easy. There's a question like, do we have a local developer experience to test MI price of apps, or is the question?
Yeah. So I mean, the question is, can I write to the program once? I guess there's an app authentication library or something that allows you to say create the token in Visual Studio. That puts it somewhere or other so that you don't have to change the software, whether it runs on your local system or whether it runs on Azure. It just automatically falls back between three approaches. Is that token there? Okay, fall back to, am I running on an Azure machine? Okay, fall back to whatever it is. The token, unfortunately, is created under your local user that you're running Visual Studio under. So because the local debug runs under the network service, it can't find it. And so it fails that, and then it goes, well, am I an Azure machine? Nope. Am I whatever the third option is? Nope. And so you can't actually log in via MSI. Excuse me. You can't actually log in with MSI with the local debug environment. It works fine with like any other .NET Core app, just does not work running in Service Fabric. So will the MI supports support that?
So currently, I think as the preview announcements are all like encouraging ARM deployment scenarios, and we did not offer local or one box scenario. We are trying to work with the Azure SDK team to enable that, but it could happen after the GA date. If it happens before that, we will let you know. We're working with them to add support so that we are able to do a local development and test MI for SF applications. Currently, that is not available. We are working on it, and if it happens before GA, we will also update that in the GA announcement.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah, and Whit, if you can find that support ticket and mail me it, I would appreciate that so I can figure out what's going on. I know that like .NET
dropped it in the chat. I was trying to.
Okay, cool. I'll look there. I know that like .NET Core doesn't support things like elevated privileges because that's a Windows only concept, and .NET Core is specifically trying to be cross-plat. But I was not aware that that extended to the process that gets launched, usually still gets launched under a particular Windows identity and should be able to access machine resources based on that identity. If that's broken, then that's something I don't understand and I want to go find out more.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, there's a whole table that kind of walked through, if this doesn't work, then try using these things instead, set these environment variables, try this. Mm-hmm. And I went through the list, couldn't get a single one to work.
I'll take a look.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So there's a question
now ultimately, I guess the alternative for anyone that wants to try and go down this road too is the new Azure.identity package. You can just, use a certificate instead, skip the whole process.
Yeah, I think that's not quite managed identity anymore, but yes,
it's not. But it ultimately, you could write one thing, it works locally, and fall back to MSI when it's actually in Azure.
Good old certs, yeah, everyone's favorite. So there's a question here from Peter asking, is there a roadmap for Azure Portal SF admin features or SF Explorer features? Do you want to handle?
Well, there was a point at which we'd actually considered embedding SFX as an iframe into Portal.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure that stuff is like fallen off the face of the earth for now because Portal has very particular guidelines, standards. Yeah, standards is one word that you can use. So at this point, I think probably not actually, because I think the focus that we're having, at least on investing on the Portal side, is more related to creating clusters in the right way, and then management and ease of management with things like permissions, certs, identities. Most of the other stuff we're expecting, like admin operations, we're expecting that you'll probably be doing via secure operations in PowerShell, or the right people with the right permissions, the cluster will be doing off of a UI like Portal.
Yeah.
And so given that that's our current hypothesis, and that's sort of most of the feedback we've been getting, we're focusing more on making the Portal experience actually simpler and trying to make the things that are currently a little hard and require a bunch of clicking to be a little easier.
Right.
As opposed to investing in adding completely new functionality.
Yeah, so this is an example, I think, where we talk about this concept in the team using the word encapsulation, which isn't quite right. But the idea is that more of the things that you need to do to your cluster, which today might require going to other Azure resources, manipulating them, coming back to the cluster, manipulating it. We want to try and streamline some of this stuff because we see it causing issues and incidents for people, right? So I think a common one is what was the first one we did? We did the durability tier mismatch problem, right? Where we would realize that people had misconfigured the cluster in a way that causes common errors. And we now, underneath the portal, like in the resource providers, have a dialogue between the Service Fabric resource provider and some other Azure resource providers to prevent that type of misconfiguration from happening. So nothing looks different in the portal, but the common experiences that you run into when using the portal are now handled better under the hood. Or kind of the things that we're tossing around next are, can we handle things like if you go to the portal and you go to the VM scale set and you do something destructive to the VM scale set. Today, what happens is that the compute resource provider that is managing the scale set goes ahead and does that thing, or starts doing it anyway. And then if you're on, say, silver or gold durability, the Service Fabric cluster might stop that or stall that activity out. So you get into this weird state where the infrastructure is trying to accomplish something because you told it to do it, and then Service Fabric is stopping it because it's not safe to do. Instead, what we want to do is prevent that operation entirely, right? So if you go to your VM scale set and you say, I don't know that this is going to be one, but let's just say, for example, you go click deallocate scale set, right? Normally, that's not a safe operation. It's not something we want the infrastructure to start trying to accomplish. So we would block or in some way, put a message up that says, hey, that's not a safe operation to do. This operation was rejected, right? So we're thinking of more of these scenarios where we're not really adding any new bells or whistles or knobs to the portal per se, but we are making the activities that people perform in the portal today simpler, easier, and less prone to failure or strangeness. That's kind of the main focus. Regards to SF Explorer specifically, it lives in its own repo. And so if you go there, somebody can probably grab the GitHub link and drop it in. But like SFX is developed as a separate component. And then we pull it into the main runtime or the main product periodically. So if you go there, you can see, open issues and incidents, and the guy that works on it, Jeffrey, is pretty responsive. And so if you leave requests for feedback or feature requests in there, we go through there and look at those features or requests periodically and see what we can do. Most of the stuff that we've been doing in SFX so far has been focused on surfacing more information around health reports, or making it easy if you have large clusters or a large number of services to really drill down to particular pieces of information that are most relevant, right? Because sometimes when you have hundreds of nodes, it can be really hard to see where problems are or what issues are. So again, it's not fundamentally changing it or adding a ton of things, but it is, based on the feedback that we get from you and from other folks, it is, improving the usability and improving how SFX exposes that information. Those are the kind of the main things we've been working on. If there are particular features or capabilities you're interested in or you think should be either in the portal or in SFX, I would say let us know. You can mail us directly, you can drop a note here, you can open up a GitHub issue and send us that, and we can take a look at those and see about adding those things. We always like feedback and requests for new functionality. Question on event store for on-prem. You, buddy?
It is somewhere on the roadmap. Where it's on the roadmap is kind of hard to answer.
Yeah.
The main difference, like the reason it doesn't work today, for some historical context, is basically there were two ways we could have approached to building the event store service. One was to architect an entire cache inside the cluster, and that was sort of the original idea. But then we were also working on simultaneous projects to thin down the package and the implications of having all the system services within the cluster itself. And so at some point we made the call to take the dependency on Service Fabric traces that were being emitted by our own system services that are typically just used for diagnostics in the case that something's wrong with the cluster. And so what we ended up doing was taking dependency on that existing in a specific location in Azure file storage, which only happens when you actually have a cluster running in Azure. And so theoretically, there is therefore a cheap hack where if you upload your logs in a particular way from your standalone cluster to Azure, you could run the event store service, but it's not something I would even try to get working.
It's not wholly self-contained.
It's not. And so the thing that's missing is we have to re-architect or have a second version of it that actually works as a real cache using like a reliable collection or whatever, but inside the Service Fabric cluster so that you can query on it. That work is actually a little more costly than we expected. We sort of started it at some point, but then we had a bunch of high-price stuff come up over the last couple of months, and so we haven't really made progress. The other thing we've realized is a lot of people that are on-prem have more robust monitoring solutions and have invested in more robust infrastructure and platform monitoring that goes beyond Service Fabric. So it's typically a lot of enterprise customers that are using Service Fabric on-prem have larger contracts with companies like Dynatrace or AppDynamics or whatever that actually do this on their behalf. And so some of the I guess demand that was coming for this was also waning over the last couple of months. So we haven't really pushed this as hard as maybe we could have. And so I'd be curious to know if this is something that you absolutely need, please do reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk to you about it and see what we can do to enable you, or at least point you to alternatives that might make sense in the meanwhile. Is that fair, Michael? Let me know in the chat if there's any follow-up questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think we'd also like to know your usage of Service Fabric on-prem, right?
Yeah.
Like we sometimes find on-prem is kind of a black box for us sometimes.
It's a black hole. It's way bigger
Service
than
Fabric
we
goes in
expect.
and then we don't know what's there.
What's there? Yeah.
So if we'd be interested in your use cases there, and if there's anything we can do to help out, or how you're using Service Fabric on-prem. That is a supported environment. Maybe not everybody on the call would know that, but you can take Service Fabric and deploy it on your own hardware. You're not limited to Azure. If that's a thing that you need because you're a regulated environment or you already have your own data centers or stuff like that, that's a supported environment. We see some usage there, but we mainly find out about it when people come and ask us questions. Because a lot of people, because it's an air-gapped environment or highly regulated, it doesn't phone home and give us telemetry or things like that. That also makes things like diagnosing and debugging it a little harder sometimes because we don't have all the same tools that we have in Azure. So if that is a scenario that you're running in or interested in, I would say reach out to Deep and me, and we'd love to learn a little more about it and kind of get a sense of how people are using it.
And by the way, I've actually posted our survey as well too. If you guys are interested in actually filling that in for us, that would be helpful. And again, we would like to actually reach out to you directly if you're actually using, it's not just on-prem, but anything with Service Fabric, that's actually very helpful for us. And for the ongoing, of course, with the roadmap or anything that you guys actually are seeing that you want us to actually go regardless of our roadmap.
Yes, and Natalie points out, if you have questions on MI, she's the one working on that. I don't really do anything here anymore. We have good people.
Sure, Matt.
Yeah.
Empowering others to.
I see you.
This is good. Okay.
Question from Whit on reverse proxy. Any news to share on replacements to the current reverse proxy approach? Envoy was on the radar at one point, but there's guidance to use traffic. But the latest release doesn't support SF. Where does this stand now?
So lots of people still use Trafic. The Trafic plugin was initially done by some community members in consultation with some couple Microsoft people that weren't even direct SF employees. I know that Trafic broke kind of their plugin architecture when they went from, I think it was 1.7 to 2, and I haven't seen people pick up the plugin architecture and modernize it to that new format. I know that there are teams using Trafic for this even inside Microsoft, and 1.7 still seems to be working for them. Regarding the Envoy work, this has kind of changed a little bit. When we were talking about building this reverse proxy into SF directly. First, we already have a pretty basic one that is a very rudimentary reverse proxy, right? It doesn't have any advanced routing rules. It's not a service mesh in any way. It's really just a proxy. It's pretty simple. That seems to work for the majority of the workloads that we see. There are cases, of course, where it doesn't. And the majority of folks that use the reverse proxy or that have problems with it find that something like Azure API management or Azure App Gateway, either on their own or combined with the reverse proxy, ends up suiting their needs. So I see a lot of Azure Traffic Manager to App Gateway to Azure API management to service. That flow seems to be pretty common. Or even API management, rewrite a URL, hit the reverse proxy, and then to the service. So the need to get a more robust or richer proxy into the cluster proper has decreased somewhat. A lot of these solutions, when we started building the first reverse proxy, didn't really exist, or there wasn't this sort of integration. The other thing that happened is that Microsoft and Azure kind of realized that this need for a richer service mesh concept was bigger than just workloads that ran in SF, right? It turns out that you've got AKS, app services, ACI, functions, some services running in Service Fabric, maybe some batch stuff, I don't even know. And that a lot of these, separate services have the same set of challenges or the same issues that you would have in a service environment like Service Fabric. And so there became this desire to kind of up-level this reverse proxy service mesh scenario to something that was more comprehensive in Azure. So a lot of that work transferred from kind of the Service Fabric team, where we were kind of fiddling around with it on our own, to Azure networking, and they've been kind of leading the work around, what does it mean to get more of a comprehensive service mesh for Azure? I haven't seen anything pop out of that yet, but I know that there is some work ongoing. And hopefully we can find more information and work with them to see, when they do build something, can we make sure that we either adopt it or integrate with it, so that you get some of those capabilities with Service Fabric as well. Again, I understand that that's only for Azure. We didn't want to duplicate the work, but we have to then figure out, for on-prem or for customers that don't want to use whatever comes out of Azure or whoever can't wait, what are the other solutions that are available, and what alternatives do we put together? Today, Traefik still seems to be working for the majority of folks, but I do understand the desire to get to the modern plugin architecture there. It's just not work that the SF team we ever did ourselves, so we would have to figure out how to fund that or promote it or something. You're not the only one asking this, so maybe if you look to your left and look to your right, and there's 3 other people who would like the Traefik plugin modernized, I would say, I know that there's an open PR, or maybe not an open PR, but certainly an open issue related to it. Gather those folks, maybe tag me, and I can help, like I did with the last one. I helped with the design and I helped with the architecture of it, even though I didn't do any of the coding myself. I'm happy to provide guidance or suggestions. I'm not a Go programmer, but hopefully somebody is, and we can figure out how to modernize this thing and get it up to date for the rest of traffic.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Let's see. All right. Is there any other questions that I'm missing here? So Keiko, you sent out a survey that you mentioned it briefly.
Yep.
You want to talk a little bit more about it?
Give some context on.
Sure. So this is actually a survey that we're going into. I just briefly talked about hey, we're trying to understand how many customers, again, going into on-prem in Service Fabric, as well as any other customers who are utilizing some other application platform as well too. It's for us to understand more about what is it that the customer is looking for going forward with with this survey as well too. And if you actually see on the top of the survey, we have a new alias that you could actually send to. This will go to all the PMs, not just the individual. So let's say you forgot matter like deeper, like Anthony's D list, it's actually there right there, so it would actually go to any of us. And again, within here, we'd like to understand like, a little bit more of your day-to-day operational piece. What are you using our products for? And it's not just our product, but any Azure platform products as well too, such as like, ACI, like, AKS, Server Fabric, Windows, on-prem, list goes on, and functions as well too. And again, what is it that you're having pain points on? Like, and again, we'd like to actually get into deeper in terms of usability. What is it that we could actually do best? And this may actually influence our roadmap as well too. So I'm not guaranteeing that it will, but again, this is something that we may. Okay, sorry, I kind of missed. Hello?
Might have just been.
Okay. So the other thing is like, what type of actually, like, are you guys using application modeling, like in terms of actors, like stateful workflows or stateless? Anything like that, that's actually something that really helps us a little bit more. Again, going back into like, what is it that you guys are doing with your development experiences? What's the development type, modeling, this goes on. So again, give us that information. And then if you want to give us more feedback, definitely like, on the bottom it says, hey, if you want to actually call, like a phone interview with us, just say yes and we'll try to schedule it with you folks as well. And again, spread out the word on the survey because like we'd like to actually get more information. The more the better for us, and it becomes the product becomes a lot better.
Okay. So Whit asked a question about the chat-based Q&A. Maybe I'll let Colby actually answer this one because she helped us get it set up.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I can touch on this a little bit. One of my kind of like sister teams is running this new Q&A service. So I can tell you that this Q&A is supposed to be a replacement for MSDN. So it should be your first place that you want to stop for the best and fastest answers from verified sources. So you can think of it as like one step closer to an engineering answer than you might get on, let's say, like a Stack Overflow or something like that. That's a very broad, extremely public platform. When you enter onto Microsoft Q&A, I have been told that you do need to make, you have to like sign in, and that's so that they can kind of verify answers and they can get like verified answerers, like people that answer. And so, yeah, it just is rolling out now. They're looking to GA all Azure services in Q&A by like May. So stay tuned for that, but they do have Service Fabric up as Matt just linked. So yeah, it's a new Q&A service, but it is supposed to be replacing MSDN and just be a more intelligent version of MSDN and a more modernized one. And we're hoping to someday have Q&A for all Microsoft products you could possibly imagine.
We'll get there.
But for now, we have it for Service Fabric.
I guess that goes back to my original question though. How is that supposed to compare to just using an Azure support ticket? Yeah, where they will get back to me within 24 hours or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a support issue and it's affecting your day-to-day operations, I would say to like still make that support ticket. But I would say like to start experimenting in Q&A and start answering questions because their SLA is supposed to be 24 hours on most questions, similar to a support ticket. So it is supposed to be more of a community-based platform that can start to replace your support as it matures more. But yeah, if you want more information, I can also provide contacts for one of the PMs on the Q&A team. Yeah.
I think the best corollary is, yeah, it's really designed to be a replacement for MSDN, right? So I wouldn't put my server is on fire questions on MSDN, right? So I wouldn't put them in this place either. But you can think of it maybe more as a, today on the GitHub issues list, we get a lot of things that aren't issues. It's not like a bug in the product. It's just like a, hey, how does this work? Or hey, how do I debug this scenario? Or what is this API for? It would be a good home for those types of questions. Of course, there's always Stack Overflow for those types of questions as well. And we try and track both to varying degrees of success. So anything critical still goes to support. There isn't an attempt to have an SLA on this site, so we don't have an SLA for Stack Overflow questions. I dip my head in once in a while and try and answer anything that's been lingering. But this one is going to have an actual SLA attached to it. that we're hoping to hang on to. So I think you're right that it's not probably a support replacement, but hopefully it is something that we can grow and use with the community to kind of get answers to common questions that aren't product issues or live site stuff in a reasonable amount of time.
Okay, so it's more for if I'm looking for guidance and couldn't make this call or something.
Right.
Yeah, wait, you're in on the Azure Customer Connection, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be, people ask questions on the customer connection right now, and we still do welcome that, but Q&A should be that first stop in replacement of like MSDN, and I also kind of in replacement to the customer connection. I will also just say that it's community supported, and that's how it'll thrive. So if any of you guys want to show your expertise in something like Service Fabric, or any other service that has been onboarded to Q&A, you can go in and answer questions, and depending on the quality of your answer, you can become like a certified answerer, however they're phrasing that. And they're hoping to have, badges or things like that coming up eventually down the road. So yeah.
Okay, great.
Greg asked the question, is there any sort of managed service for SF programming models? I know there was talk about SF Mesh a while back, but it got limited to containers. Are there plans for this? There isn't really at this time, because the programming models are directly related to the Service Fabric runtime. And so to use the programming models, you kind of have to know that you're using the runtime. And we've talked about some ways to maybe expose those at higher levels, but we haven't figured out actually how to do it yet. What we are talking about doing, if you take the work I mentioned earlier around the encapsulation and you kind of put that 6 months or a year down the road, what does your environment look like? You see less infrastructure, or you manage less infrastructure directly. I could imagine a world, we don't have a timeline or a plan to do this yet, but I can imagine a world where you're not managing the VM scale sets directly, right? You've just told Service Fabric, hey, I want roughly these number of resources and auto scale my environment this way, auto scale my services this other way. You might not deal as much with key cert or secret rotations, right? MI is helping out with a little bit of that. The Key Vault plugins are helping with a little bit with that. We might get more automation around that sort of scenario where, similar to other Azure services, you get a cert generated, or you can pick it up from somewhere and then rotate it on a regular schedule, and that gets automatically managed by the environment. So it's not going to be there's not at this point a view that it would become a fully managed environment in the sense that there would be no infrastructure visible to you. But we are working to try and address some of the complexity and challenges that come with having to manage all of the Azure infrastructure that a cluster requires, and making that simpler, hiding the parts that can be hidden, automating the parts that can be automated, cutting out some of these common misconfigurations and errors that I mentioned earlier, and getting it to a point where even if it's not fully managed, it requires minimal infrastructure management. And then the goal is to see how minimal we can get it, right? So that's kind of what we're working on. Again, it comes in small parts, so you might not have noticed, we noticed, but you might not have noticed that certain configurations are impossible anymore, that were common errors. But we did those out and turned those into error messages, right? So we see in aggregate that a certain class of issues or incidents has gone from we'd see 10 a week to 0 a week, right? And we're going to keep peeling scenarios off of that stack based on our support volume, common requests from customers, and things like that, to reduce the complexity and the source of errors that come in because of all this infrastructure management. So that's not directly answering your question, but it is, I think we acknowledge that getting to a managed service model as close as possible is desirable, right? And then we're going to be going down that in a very pragmatic way based on the issues and incidents that we see and what we can actually do with our partner teams around some of these scenarios, right? I have to somehow take over or encapsulate some of the infrastructure management and become more of a pass-through rather than an environment where you can go and manipulate your infrastructure and then Service Fabric has to kind of react to it, which is the model that we're in today. So flipping that around a little bit is kind of a goal for us. And so it gets us towards a managed thing, but not fully. Let's see, question. Is there any end-to-end example showing optimal logging guidance? There are docs explaining how I might use Eventflow, App Insights, but those are in several docs and whole blocks of monitoring diagnostic docs. Is there one code-based example showing how all this might be combined? I don't think we have it all together in one place. I know that there was a goal to have a best practices guide for this. Part of the reason that we haven't historically is that a lot of the samples that we make, we try to make sure can run on your local dev machine or don't presume that you have an Azure subscription. We didn't want to sign anybody up for anything just to run a demo. But that's something we should probably look into as a best practices one-off that kind of puts everything in one place. I'm staring at Keiko because we borrowed Keiko recently from Azure Monitoring and Diagnostics generally as a team member. So hopefully some of that expertise we can leverage to tell us what we should be doing. So it's a good request. I think either at a minimum, we owe a best practices single doc that says, here are the steps to follow. And ideally we could get to some sort of default template and sample app as well. So I think that's a good request.
Right, thanks.
Oh, that's interesting.
Wrapped
What Greg said, yeah.
Yeah.
So we actually have a sample of something that does this, where you can run Eventflow as a -1 agent in your cluster and pipe everything to it.
Maybe find that and dump
Yeah,
it.
that's worth it. It's cheap.
There was also like the event processor host was a
That
design.
makes sense though.
Yeah.
I
That would also solve the problem of not having the event store.
Yes,
in a
to some
cluster.
degree. Yeah. Sorry.
I was just saying, we found that the Eventflow libraries were really bloated. When you bring in Eventflow, you brought in a ton of references. And then if, for example, you were to, it was a lot for the development teams to manage. So instead we said, here's a simple interface. This is our logging service. Behind the scenes, we have Eventflow piping it all out. And they just get a very simple signature to use as they want. We put in a collection of arguments and they can log whatever they want. And just really putting that layer of abstraction in between the applications and the logging has drastically cut down on the complexity of having to train everybody up on Eventflow and how to use it. It is, when you're using App Event Source as your target, it is a bit of a pain to log with. But instead, we ended up using an HTTP output to go to a Logstash endpoint, and it made it a lot simpler.
Yep. I mean, I think that's a really good design. The original team that was building Eventflow wanted to build something alongside of it, which was I think they called it Event Host or something like that. But it was designed to do almost exactly what you're describing. Instead of having, for example, a connection per service from the service to wherever the logs were going via Eventflow, there would be one agent running on the machine that aggregated everything, filtered it down, and then ejected it into some outbound place where the logs actually were collected. I don't know that ever got built by them.
It did not, because they ended up just saying users can do it if they need.
Yeah, if they need to. Yeah.
So this is interesting. So Greg, if you can then make your thing multi-tenant, maybe Whit can send his logs to your central agent and.
Yeah, maybe you just found a business.
By the way, we did everything on-prem.
Ah, yes, phenomenal, perfect. As long as your network's open.
Yeah, I'm sure the network team would love that.
Ingress allowed from Star, and I think you've got a business there.
Yeah, sure.
I believe with stuff, a bunch of it's also on-prem, right?
So which is the one who does it? Like,
No, Greg.
No, I'm entirely on Azure. So
Oh, you're entirely on Azure. Okay, so Greg
yeah,
is. Greg
publish all the Azure integrations you want. Go for it.
okay.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, this is a good example of the type of things. We've done a couple of these where people have come into the Q&As before and have actually demoed some of their technology or things that might be reusable, shareable components. So I'm not gonna put Greg on the spot right now, but if anybody on the call who might be named Greg were to want to think about open sourcing it or showing it off, we love these sorts of things, and we like promoting them so that, you know, you folks can leverage each other's learnings and stuff where possible, right? We know that's not gonna work for everybody, but
Michael just asked the question straight up. Hi, Greg, would you mind talking about your solution at another time?
yeah. Greg, you might just zip it up and attach it as an attachment.
One of the pitfalls we ran into with this is we're not only logging from Service Fabric applications to the service, we're also logging from IIS-based applications. So one of the problems we had is when you want to send the logs from a Service Fabric service, what we're doing is we're creating a NuGet wrapper to simplify even the connection to the service, to make it a very simplified connection. And because Service Fabric DLLs need the 64-bit DLL in them, we were unable to consume that NuGet package from our IIS applications that were compiled to any CPU.
Yep.
So we had to create two different NuGet wrappers based upon how you're going to consume that logging service.
Yeah. The 64-bit onlyness of Service Fabric is something that we run into from time to time in cases like this, where people want to share a component or a reference between some stuff that's running in Service Fabric and stuff that runs outside. I've talked with the tooling and the build folks a couple of times to see if there's something we can do about that, but we haven't found a good solution yet. Fundamentally, SF is 64-bit only, is kind of one of the problems we run into. So we might be able to offer 32-bit libraries for things like the client-side stuff. Fabric Client might get a 32-bit package or something that could be compiled to any CPU. But the core runtime stuff is 64-bit only, and that's not going to change. If you think this gets us into problems today, imagine the problems it got us into in 2008 when we made the decision to be 64-bit only. So we're living with this choice and hoping that eventually everything kind of keeps up. But of course, that's a pipe dream. So we're always looking into it. I think this is another good reminder for me to go see if there's something I can do in the tooling or compiler folks to see if there's something we can do around the targeting so that, you know, it's one package, but you don't have to have this separate packages in order to handle this sort of scenario. It's a good request. I don't know that we'll be able to do anything, but I should go look again to see what the state of the art is.
Yeah, I can take a look at the wrapper service that we have to see if it's something I could share one of these times, but I have to make sure there's no company secrets in it, etc.
Yes.
I don't think it is.
Yes, strip out the access tokens before you throw it out there. Yeah. All right, we're in the last couple of minutes. We usually do a lightning round if there's any other questions. So if you've got any last minute questions, throw them in the chat or open up the mic and holler at us. While we're waiting for any of those to come in, I do want to reiterate, please take the survey that Keiko sent out. Send it to your teammates, send it to other people you know, retweet it. I think we should probably tweet it so that people can retweet it.
I'll put it on.
That gives us, we're trying to gather some more information so that we know more about the scenarios, particularly on-prem scenarios, which are kind of opaque to us. Get your feedback, figure out what the pressing needs are. There's a partner survey going out on serverless more. Is that
Yes.
the serverless one?
There's a serverless one as well too.
We should grab that one and put it in there too.
Okay.
There's another one that's more on the serverless side of things. So for those of you that have been around, you know that we started on this thing called Service Fabric Mesh, which was trying to get to that managed application environment. It's unlikely at this point that, based on the feedback that we've gotten from Mesh, that Mesh is going to GA in its current form. We've gotten some projects that have grown out of Mesh. When you look at things like Dapper and Ohm, those are where some of the learnings have gone. And then I think the team is trying to figure out collectively, what is the future for serverless applications on Azure? That's something we're working on and that we're working with other Azure teams to help kind of define and figure out. So the serverless survey will give us some good info there if you have input. But please do take the regular Service Fabric one as well. And then there were, the last couple of questions. if we have any questions, what's a good contact email? I think we sent out the SFPM one. We can dump that in there. That'll work. You
Have
can
you already
find
sent it
me.
out above or no?
No,
Put it in again. It's
I
fine.
think we just shared individual contact, like you,
You know what, I'm gonna actually share that, yeah.
Yeah, share
that alias.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a new deal, that nobody has actually seen it before, but it's actually for our team, which goes into both the serverless and ourselves. We're
Yep.
all the same team, so
We'll put
just
it
let you
there.
know. I will just send it out.
And
Honestly, I just looked at the top of that survey thing. You can't see the email given the background.
Oh, okay.
Blue link, green background. You can't even see
Alright,
it
I'll
there.
change the color. Okay, good feedback, great, thanks.
oh man, colorblind. Yeah, that's gonna be a problem.
That is bad.
It's a good point, though.
We should,
Yeah.
we should send it, yeah.
It shouldn't even let you do that silly
Yeah, we should
framework.
send a feedback to,
Anyway.
forms as well too.
So there's the alias. You can contact us there. You can find me on Twitter. You can find Deep on Twitter. You can contact us on GitHub. You can open things on Stack Overflow and then forward it to us if they don't get answered. We want to make ourselves pretty available. And then was there one last question?
Any plans to integrate natively with Dapper going forward?
We're looking at
Kinda,
this
sorta?
kind of sort of like
Yeah.
there's already Leon has a PR out there to try and add SF support for some of Dapper's abstractions. We're not tracking that specifically, but we are, the Dapper team is partially part of the Service Fabric team, and we, Mark, who used to work on Service Fabric directly, now works directly on Dapper. So there's a lot of, heritage DNA there. But we don't have this semester, so up until about June, we don't have Dapper integration as a specific item on the roadmap. I think if you want to see that, let us know, and we can take it into consideration and see where it lands.
Sure, it sort of fits into my last question about the monitoring and whatnot. Is that we're really interested in the pub sub functionality on Dapper, but of course it seems to have its own tracing mechanism. So it's like, okay, great. How do we potentially tie that into how Service Fabric does that, or back end we just have a bunch of duplication of stuff?
Right. That's part of the challenge that we see right now is that Dapper offers a lot of great abstractions, but it also duplicates some stuff that we already do natively in the Service Fabric product. So we got to figure out what Dapper's story is for those sorts of environments, right? The abstractions are good. That's what we want to give you as a developer. But on the other hand, we don't want to double log everything or have two different actor implementations or whatever, right?
Exactly.
That's what we got to figure out. Known issue with 7.0 and 2019 server. There's not that I'm aware of.
We actually had somebody report a problem.
But it was DNS.
It was DNS.
But I don't think it was 7.0. I don't think it was 7.0 specific or
No, it was
2019
not.
specific.
It was not.
So
You should open up a ticket.
yeah,
If you're having something serious that you can't address, I would say open up a support case and let us help you.
yeah. Too long since the last. Yeah, that was a big gap. So sorry about that.
We have someone here to help now.
Yeah.
So you'll see
We're
us
back on board. We'll see you in a
Yeah.
month.
We're a little over time. Thank you folks for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone. See you at the next one. Bye-bye.